right, guys, we are here today with Noah Rothbaum, renowned whiskey author, is here to talk to us a little bit today about the Whiskey Bible. Noah, how are you today, buddy?
Thank you so much for having me. I've been looking forward to this since we set it up.
I know, right? Like I feel like we met I think we met at one of the festivals somewhere over the past few
No
years.
doubt, no
Um,
doubt.
but
They all blend
actually,
together into one giant festival in my mind. So,
yes, 1,000%.
yeah,
There are some standouts, but the procedural of all of them are very
yeah.
similar. And you met somebody where there was whiskey and it was probably warm and insert date and time
Look,
with whatever
I
scenario.
am, I am impressed with myself that I can remember most folks that I've met. The fact that we've met at a whiskey festival,
Does
I'm
not
going to
narrow
count that as
anything
a
down.
win. Like trying to figure out which one or what year.
Nope. Nope.
That I think is beyond my abilities, given how many of these festivals I've been to. But again, I mean, I think it's what a wonderful thing about our world is that, you know, it's much larger than it used to be, but it's still fairly small. And you run into the same people over and over again. And to be honest, you get to be friends, which is, I feel like that's a real blessing of being in our whiskey world.
100%. You get to build that rhythm with people where you may not see them every day, but you do have that shared connection that when you get back
Yeah.
together, you're like, oh, cool. This we think similarly about a lot of things,
Yeah.
and I think that creates a baseline for the
Great.
community.
And you get to meet people from, that you would never probably have crossed paths with, from all parts of the country, all types of backgrounds, all types of other interests, right? And that's what's really cool about whiskey. I mean, I when I started doing this, I don't know, I'm old, so almost 30 years ago, I would never have thought that whiskey would take me around the world, right? And to meet all these people and do all these incredible things. I was just happy, to find rye whiskey.
Right, right,
I
right.
had no expectations that this would create a whole life for me and a whole niche, but here we are.
But what a niche to have.
Yeah.
I think I feel fortunate sometimes that the niche we have fallen into, chosen, entered into, however you want to phrase. Like we could be talking about like clocks right now. You realize
Oh,
that,
for
right? Like
sure.
or
Absolutely.
porcelain cats or any of the things that people
Porcelain cats.
you know like it's the same way you can't be a nerd anymore because to be a nerd back in the day you had to be isolated from the larger social experiment, and now whatever you nerd out on, there is a group for you. There is a
It's
thing that
amazing,
if
right?
right, I mean, there's a con, there's
Everybody can find
probably
their people,
yeah, you can find your tribe. There's a porcelain cat con happening right now somewhere.
somewhere, and people are very happy to be there. And
Yeah,
I say, great. Let me know what kind of whiskey you want while you're talking porcelain cats.
a hundred
That's
percent
it's true, but it is really different because I remember in the early 2000s, late 90s, the folks who were into cocktails, classic cocktails, cocktail shakers, whiskey. It was a very, very small group of people. I mean, even the first year I went to Tales of the Cocktail, which is obviously one of the large industry events. It takes place in New Orleans, generally at the hottest possible part of the year, the third week of July. It feels like you are in a clothes dryer the whole time. Um, but that when I went, in '08 for the first time, everybody fit into one restaurant. I mean, yeah, it was a large restaurant, but now I don't know. I mean, tens of thousands of people show up every year. It's incredible, right? So, it went from just all these random people who, for one reason or another, were totally into classic cocktails, or they were collectors, or they'd fallen into it, or they'd worked in the industry. But it was a very, very small group of folks. I even remember going to the London Bar Show around the same time. And, it was a giant hall. Most of the people, music is blasting. People are buying like deep fryers and garbage cans and I don't know what. It's like it's a trade show. And then in the corner were all of the cocktail nerds. geeking out about, recipes that we had found, in old books or rediscovered in newspapers. It's just funny. It definitely made me realize at the time that we were the minority and the majority was out there doing something else. And, it's a classic David versus Goliath, and somehow we won, right? You go to
Right.
Vegas, there are no more cocktails in plastic cups with red straws. You're drinking, a Sam Ross original. He's one of the best bartenders in the world who created both the penicillin and the paper plane. And for a long time, he was working for the Venetian, right? So you'd go in and you get a Sam Ross cocktail. Like there were no, I mean, there are also no free drinks anymore, but that's a different podcast, I guess. But I never thought, that in that kind of mass market venue arena, that you could get a delicious craft cocktail created by one of the best bartenders, who's ever, stepped behind a bar in Vegas of all places. You know what I mean? Just incredible. I mean, it's just how far we've come.
It's super interesting when you go back to that time period too. Like watching whiskey explode is almost
Oh,
like when you used to see cell tower. Like you remember the map, like the Verizon map,
right,
where there
right.
was like one dot in North Carolina and that was the tower. And if
Yeah,
you were in that, that was your area where you had service. And now the world is just 1,000 of those little red dots, that blue dots, purple dots, red dots, and everything is just completely
yeah,
saturated.
yeah,
Uh, the same way you're
absolutely.
talking about Las Vegas, getting to be in New York in the early 2000s and watching people go from their whatever they were in love with before, which was mostly, the IPA craze or whatever. Early
Yeah.
2000s, it wasn't even IPA yet.
Vodkas, it was,
Yeah, your
yeah,
clear
like all
spirits and
these menus of so-called martinis, but they called
neon.
for like chocolate sauce and caramel drizzled glasses. It was
Yep.
anything in a martini glass was called a martini, and martinis were fabulously popular except for gin and vermouth, which nobody wanted. But anything else in a martini glass, we'll have it, we'll love it, call it a martini, it will sell, just not dry vermouth and gin.
No, no, don't put anything that should
Oh
go there.
God, yeah.
But
Why? Oh,
if it could be neon, if you could
yeah,
potentially put it on a club floor and make it look like a Mace Puff Daddy video, people would drink it. I mean, that was the culture.
yeah,
It was
yes.
that hip hop glam culture of
It-
the that was the
Music
same.
videos, yeah.
Yeah,
It was the
100%.
MTV music videos driving a lot of, club, bar, there was that kind of division between bars and clubs sort of
That's right.
eroded. And, even small bars kind of refashioned themselves as small clubs, with bottle service. And, this, again, this, a lot of the listeners probably are like, what are these two guys talking about?
Oh, we're giving you a history
But
lesson, people.
but it was it was weird times, and as a whiskey drinker, in some ways it was a lot easier, right? Because part of the reason why I think I gravitated toward whiskey originally was that like it was a fixed universe, right? The
Right.
wine world seems so overwhelming. My book, The Whiskey Bible, is a sister book to Karen McNeil's Wine Bible, which came out about 20 years ago or 25 years ago in '01. Um, and I remember flipping through the Wine Bible and interviewing Karen and being like, oh my God, the wine world is so vast. It has like no ending. It's like the universe. It just keeps going and going and going. I will never be able to be a wine expert. There's too much to know. And whiskey at the time, to go into a bar, maybe five single malts from Scotland, maybe five bourbons. Rye was like, I like to say it was like the Yeti, lots
Yeah.
of unconfirmed sightings, but nobody could get you a bottle. Um, so it's like very easy to go into a bar and literally taste basically every possible whiskey available and have like this incredible knowledge because it's not like today when every week it seems that certain brands put out, a limited edition this, single barrel that. There was none of that. It was like Maker's Mark made Maker's Mark. There
That's
was
right.
one Maker's Mark. Jim Beam made White Label.
Hmm.
Like, there was like Ann Evan Williams. There wasn't one Elijah Craig. Like, there was none of these, and there were the craft spirits movement hadn't really started in earnest. So like really it was a very fixed number of whiskeys, which again was very manageable to like really know them very, very well and intimately and taste them and know them in blind taste. Oh, like I could tell, oh, that's this whiskey, that's that one. Same thing with gin at the time. There were only like 6 or 7 gins, and you do a few blind tastings. You could totally do it with your eyes closed, like, oh, this is Plymouth, this is Tanqueray. Same thing with whiskey because there just wasn't that many. Now, I mean, behind you, there were probably 200 whiskeys, right? I mean, it's you go into a liquor store and it's this crazy vast selection of whiskeys from all over the world, of all kinds, that really didn't exist 25 years ago. I mean, this book, the Whiskey Bible, is over 600 pages. It's a doorstop of a book. Um, it doubles as a personal defense system. But if I'd written this book 20 years ago, it would have been a lot shorter, right? It probably would have been 100 pages, maybe.
Paperback,
Yeah,
right?
baby paperback, totally. Like, my first book, The Business of Spirits, which came out in '07, I think Publishers Weekly started its review by saying this slim volume. I was like, whoa, whoa, like no need. Like this is everything at the time I thought everybody needed to know, right? This book, the last book, the Oxford Companion to Spirits and Cocktails, which I edited with Dave Wondrich, she was the editor in chief, I was associate editor. That took a decade. That's even longer. I mean, I think that's over 1,100 pages.
Wow.
Um, both of these books challenge the binding technology. I'm not sure how much farther we could get. There are people on Amazon for the Oxford Companion. My favorite comment of the many comments, somebody was complaining that there was too much knowledge. It's like there's too much in this book. There's too much knowledge. And the other people are like, the spine's cracked. And I'm like, I am so sorry about that. But again, like you get books this big, it's like,
It's going to happen.
it's going to happen, or we have to go to 2 volumes. So thankfully the Whiskey Bible is 1 volume. If knock on wood, there are future editions. I don't know if we, maybe we'd be able to squeeze more in there. 2 volumes seems crazy, but we may be headed there.
Well, the thing I love about this book is the pacing and the intention that you've used as you walk people through the funnel of information. You don't just start with "here it all is," which is very overwhelming. Like, well, a lot of
Yeah.
whiskey people, like you do tastings and talks. I do tastings and talks. The main thing people come to you with is the knowledge they already have, and
Yeah.
you do a
Well,
great
that
job in this
is,
book of starting them off with whatever preconceived notion you have of whiskey. You give them the ABCs before you get to where they think they might be. You give them tools to help understand where the
yeah.
weight comes from. And I thought that was very nicely done in
Well,
this
thank
book.
you. I truly appreciate that. And I think in some ways, one of the hardest things about this book was the format and the flow, right? Figuring that out. I mean, there's a lot of knowledge how to parcel that out and, make it approachable and interesting and not put people completely to sleep. And, one of the things I realized like doing talks over the years is that a lot of the questions would be the same questions over and over again, right? Like, what's the difference between whiskey and bourbon, right? People don't understand that obviously whiskey is the overarching term. All of these things, bourbon, rye, scotch, are all subcategories, right? And again, it's when I do tastings, people, ask again, like, what are the rules for bourbon or rye or single malt scotch versus blend? And again, I mean, this is our job, right? It's our job to remember all of these regulations, rules, right? Which I think everything is more fascinating through the lens of whiskey, including these types of minutia. But for other people, like this is like their way to relax, right?
That's
They've
right.
already had
That's
a
right.
full day. They've gone to work. They've been with their family. They've done a thousand things in a day, run all over town. They just want to relax with a glass of whiskey. The last thing they want to remember is the ratio of corn in bourbon versus rye. So I was like, look, here it is. It's all in the book. You don't need relax. Take those files out of the computer of your mind and throw
That's
them
right.
away. It's all in the book. If you can't remember or you want to look it up, it's in there, right? You got your cheat sheets. Each chapter is divided up by different type of whiskey. At the beginning, there's like a cheat sheet about what makes each one what are the regulations and also how it differs from other whiskeys. But then the other hard part was I thought when Workman came to me, my publisher in 2020, the beginning of the year, they were like, "Oh, like we have the wine Bible, which is indispensable, indispensable reference book, right, for wine lovers around the world. We have the beer Bible, which has done very well. We'd like to continue the series with the whiskey Bible." And at first, I was like, "Oh God, like this is going to be a serious endeavor." My editor was like, "Look, like you just got to take all of that whiskey knowledge in your head and put it down on paper." And I was like, I mean, all right, that's a lot, but like, it's doable. And then of course I started doing it and I realized, wow, so much of the stuff that we thought collectively was correct or was the way that things happened turned out not to be totally true, right? So, I had to go down all these crazy rabbit holes. And, this was during the pandemic. So thankfully, all of these libraries, research institutions, archives digitized a lot of their holdings, which I would never been get access to before. So I was able to look in like Harvard's library or Princeton's or Columbia's digitally, and they would even send you part of the book as a scan, which was so helpful because sometimes I could then track down that book, from a bookstore or another archive. But it went from like too little information where we're making kind of wild, you know, f- sort of wild assumptions, filling in blanks, to now suddenly having access to much too much information, right? So vintage newspapers, magazines, federal government documents, lawsuits, all types of books. Like I found, a training manual for Hiram Walker's employees, that they
Wow.
put out like, and I think it's right before World War II. So like all of this incredible stuff that like I'm not sure anybody maybe outside of Dave Wondrich knew existed, right? So reading over a lot of this stuff and taking this sort of approach to looking whiskey overall allowed me to see things that I had never realized before or settle some of the many ongoing whiskey debates or feuds, like, when we started requiring new American oak barrels, which if you asked folks, they would give you a wide variety of
Variety.
answers. Yeah, like I mean, over like a century of different dates and reasons, right? And in reality, I found the answer in a syndicated political news column where these two journalists who wrote it were reporting about, what was happening in the hallways of Congress. And at the time, right after repeal, the government was trying to create new standards of identity for whiskey, which again, everything through the lens of whiskey is way more fascinating. That kind of stuff, like I would probably not want to read, right? But for this, it unlocked this incredible epiphany because at the time, they were doing this for both tax reasons and also because distillers needed this. But essentially there was a fight between bourbon producers and rye producers. The Coopers had already lost the beer producers because they had switched to sealed kegs. So, essentially the Coopers and the bourbon producers joined together to push through the regulations that American whiskey, bourbon, and rye had to be aged in new American oak. Meanwhile, the rye producers who had used both new and used barrels were against this. And there was a very, very contentious fight in Congress and in newspapers that goes on for years. And ultimately, the bourbon producers prevailed. And as this original article suggested, bourbon does well in New American oak. And as they said, rye tastes like turpentine in New American oak, right? So, I mean, I don't know if I necessarily agree with that, but the point was that this was not only a way to save the Coopers, benefited bourbon producers, but also was a way that the bourbon guys could stick it to the rye guys, right? Because back then, bourbon and rye were like mortal enemies, right? It
Duke
was
and
Lex
Carolina,
Luthor,
Coke and
right?
Pepsi.
Exactly. It was very, and you were either a bourbon drinker or you were a rye drinker. Like, now people drink both, obviously, but back then it was like a very dividing line. And even, you see that with like, the different presidents, when they take office, like Harry Truman was like a bourbon guy, right? And when he won and goes to DC, the New York Times publishes this incredible article about basically how DC was a rye town and now it's a bourbon town. And, the rye producers, drinkers have a very low opinion of bourbon. They call it names in the New York Times that I would never even repeat, right? And it's really interesting just that this kind of divide, right? And you realize like, just how bad things must have gotten in the 70s and 80s for the bourbon producers to start making rye, right? In
Yeah,
order to
yeah.
now they're like, oh, we wanted to save this iconic American, whiskey. But at the time, really, I think it was just there's a small group of people who still drink rye. This will help keep the lights on, and we desperately need money, right? So again, it's like Coke continuing to produce Pepsi for a very small audience just because it allows them to stay in business. And that's the true story. And again, it's
What was the year of that? Because that really does finite a lot of debate.
like you mean for the new barrels? That
Yes.
happens right after Prohibition. So like the so-called FAA, the Federal Alcohol Authority, which are holding these like hearings and figuring out all these things, it's really right after repeal. And then it stretches, and then you have things like World War II and even the Korean War where, you know, um, used barrels have to be used in a pinch because they can't get access to it. So it's like, then what do we do? Like, can we call that bourbon? Like, do we call it American whiskey? Like, can we get an exemption here because of the war? But again, it's over and over again. We have um, very romantic visions of the past for whiskey, right? And very romantic explanations. And usually these were very practical decisions, like Glenmorangie talks about having the tallest stills in Scotland. Macallan talks about having the smallest stills in Scotland. Why? We don't know. But in reality, most Scotch producers back in the 1800s were buying used stills from other people, right? It's like the old Anthony Bourdain. You're going to open a restaurant. Don't buy new pots and pans. Buy used pots and pans. Your pots and pans are going to be dented and scorched and scratched up in a few weeks. So just buy somebody else's pots and pans who's going out of business or getting rid of their pots and pans.
Right.
You'll save a ton of money. Same thing in the whiskey industry. You're starting a distillery. It's like costs a ton of money today, but also back in the 1800s. Everybody bought used stills, right? Very rarely were stills made. So who knows? Were the stills that they bought super small, super tall? Was their barn super small, super tall? Again, we don't really know, but obviously informs the way that the whiskey is made and how it tastes. And now looking back, we have this like very romantic vision of somebody at Macallan being like, yes, we're going to have Scotland's smallest stills. And as a result, we're going to have this flavor profile. Like, no, that didn't happen. You know what I mean?
Uh-uh.
Like,
Jimmy
it's
went
just
out of business up the street, and
right,
we went and
totally.
got it at a bargain, and it
Absolutely.
doubled our production or
Right,
whatever the
right.
case was.
Absolute, absolute. It's a, and over again, like we see these very, very, very sensible decisions that have then become romanticized. Like, one of the hallmarks for many years or decades of um, Irish whiskey is that it's made from a mash bill of malted and unmalted barley. That's because, yes, it changed the flavor, right? It gives it a creaminess. The unmalted barley makes it very different than Scotch. It's wonderful for marketing reasons to easily say, look, traditionally Scotch is 100% malted barley, single malt, like for, in Ireland, we use unmalted and malted for, single pot still, very different. But in reality, at a certain point, the Irish distillers were being taxed on how much malted barley they used. So they cut their tax bill in half. They just said, fine, we'll use malted and unmalted barley, tax us only on the malted barley. Like, I mean, if it was only that simple with the IRS today, just be like, sure, like well, not pay. I'll switch it up, whatever, and that. But now, a century or whatever it is, 2 centuries later, a century and a half, it's now a hallmark of distinction between Irish whiskey and basically how everybody else drinks whiskey and has totally informed the flavor. But if you'd asked anybody about this, in most whiskey books only talk about like that they use malted unmalted barley and malted unmalted barley, but they don't actually tell you why, right? And
Right.
and for the whiskey Bible over and over again, I wanted to go past just this is what it is, but try to answer the existential question of why. Like, why is it like this? Why do we do it this way? What happened to Irish whiskey? Nobody could ever tell me. Like, it was really, it nagged me for like probably 25 years, 20 years. What happened to rye? I mean, what happened to rye too, but what happened to Irish whiskey? Why did it go away? And nobody could tell me, like, I got all these different answers. Oh, Prohibition, the Irish Revolution, this, that, the other. And it's like, yeah, all those things had a major effect. I'm not debating that. But in reality, the biggest thing where Scotch becomes an international bestseller and Irish whiskey literally almost completely dies is because most Irish distillers refuse to make blends, right? And at the turn of the century, there's a famous, Royal Commission on Potable Spirits where they have all of these different famous distillers testify. And the Irish distillers, who are part of the Jameson family or Powers, right? They're like, yeah, whiskey made on a column still, that's not whiskey. Like, we would never consider that whiskey. Like, whiskey has to be made at pot still. And obviously, the column still, the what really puts it over the top is Aeneas Coffee, who ironically was Irish, but his design, there were other continuous column stills before that, but his style of column still really catches on, particularly in Scotland. Column stills can make a river of alcohol very quickly. I was the world's worst chemistry student, but distillation, essentially is a separation process, right? You're separating water and alcohol. You pump the so-called distiller's beer into a column still. Roughly 60 to 90 seconds later, it makes its way up through all of the different plates in a column still, and you get alcohol. You use a pot still, we're talking, depending upon the size of the pot still, how you're running it, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 hours. And then you got to clean it, right? The column still just runs. As long as you have more distiller's beer to put in, it can run all day and night, right? Not the same way with a pot still. You can have one column still and it will replace tons of pot stills. Or as people in Scotland realized, you can take all this labor intensive pot still whiskey, combine it with column still whiskey, lower the cost of producing the whiskey, and also like increase your production exponentially. And in Ireland they're like, we're not going to do that. We think it's going to be a different product. We don't want to make that product. They thought it was inferior to what they were making, and they dug in their heels, and literally that's why Irish whiskey almost dies, right? And by the 1960s, you have two distillers left. You have Bushmills at the north, Middleton the south. Middleton, I mean, to expand on your soda analogy, I mean, Middleton is basically if Coke, Pepsi, Dr. Pepper, Sprite, everybody joining forces and saying, okay, like we give up, like we're going to stop fighting each other, we're going to join forces, we're going to build a joint distillery at the southern part of Ireland. Pray to God that this works, because if it doesn't, we're all out of business.
Right.
And thankfully, they throw a Hail Mary, which is Jameson. They turn Jameson from which had been a pure pot still whiskey, a 7-year-old, and they make it a blend that catches on because those dummies in America are demanding blends. We want blends. We don't want pot still whiskey. And thankfully, it catches on. It saves essentially the Irish whiskey industry. That and the Irish coffee, right? Those are two things that save Irish whiskey. All of that, like you know, essentially had to piece together. Dave Weinstein and I started piecing that together for the Oxford Companion, but then really for the Whiskey Bible. And it's just one of these things where it's, all of that information, lots of small epiphanies, and then you put it together and it's like 5 pages in a 600 page book,
Right.
which
Right.
is why it takes so long to write these books. It's just that, it can take 2 weeks and you it that's responsible for like one paragraph, right? And then people read it and like, oh, that makes a lot of sense. Like, of course. And you're like, that took me like
Yeah,
two
yeah.
months. That like,
That old episode of Futurama where I thought it would take an hour to do because it took me an hour to write.
right, exactly, exactly. It's the same, and people are like, oh yeah, of course. Like, yeah, makes total sense. Like, duh. Like, oh my God. Like,
But that extra work gives the story more dimension than it would have if you were just
yes,
to say
yes,
Irish whiskey almost went away and then people found Jameson. Like
right.
your version gives you more to talk, gives the industry, gives the people that love this more to
Oh
talk
yeah,
about and think about than if they were just to go Irish whiskey
absolutely.
almost went away.
No, you're absolutely right. And obviously I love drinking whiskey. It's one of
Yes.
my favorite things to do. But but you know, my enjoyment's even that much more enhanced or increased when I know the story behind what I'm drinking, right?
A thousand
Understanding
percent.
truly, I like to say whiskey is a reflection of the people and the place where it comes from. It's also a time capsule, right? It captures, a certain moment in time, right? Knowing all of that backstory makes it even better. And, those are the types of things that make it interesting. And, you know, I feel like incredibly lucky to have been given this opportunity to go down all these rabbit holes, right? Somebody actually paid me to do all this
It's awesome.
research, which is boggles the mind. And then I was able to deliver and find, all this stuff. And like, I was worried that this book would just have all the old chestnuts, right? And that every book has. And I realized, or every old story, and I realized, wow, like, the truth, it's actually, not only like do we not have like it, we don't know it, but it's even more fascinating than what we think the story is, right? And just over and over again, all these crazy things like, I never really thought about Irish coffee, in America. In Ireland, it's non-existent. Like, who drinks coffee in Ireland? I mean, up until recently, there are probably now Costa coffees and Starbucks all over the island.
You know there is.
But up until fairly recently, nobody drank coffee. Like, this isn't a thing. And it's this crazy story where it starts being served at the airport to basically Americans and VIPs, Gaelic coffee, and then it becomes Irish coffee. But what's fascinating about it is that, obviously it catches on in San Francisco, first at the Buena Vista, a German pub with a Mexican name, serving Irish coffee, only in America.
Yeah.
Um, becomes this sensation and really in many ways saves Irish whiskey, right? We always write it off as kind of a joke. Um, but if the Irish coffee hadn't, come along and literally gone viral in an old school way, we probably wouldn't have Irish whiskey. And, what's fascinating is I think it's the Buena Vista, was using Tullamore Dew at the beginning, and I think they still do. And the distributor for Tullamore Dew sends a telegram to the distillery being like, we need more. Like we need like, what it was like, I forget, it's in the book, I think like 1,000 cases, right? And the distillery is like, gets the telegram, was like, nah. And they call a distributor and they're like, which probably was fabulously expensive at the time, was like, wait, we got this telegram. Obviously, this is a mistake. You could not possibly want this much Irish
Yeah.
whiskey. Like,
It's a joke. You guys are
it's a
pranking
joke,
us.
right? Like, or like they said 1,000, you won 10, right? Or what? And they were like, no, like send this as much as you can to me.
Wow.
Like, and it becomes, it's at the World's Fair, and other brands start doing Irish coffee, and even other types of liquor, and it helps to keep Irish whiskey alive, right? It keeps it in, which gave me a much better appreciation for Irish whiskey and Irish coffee, and just this whole, so grateful to be able to walk into a liquor store now and have our pick of so many wonderful Irish whiskeys and realize like how close we were not to having that.
That's right.
Which is, and again, it's that story over and over again. And each chapter is about, essentially a different major distilling region, area, country. And it's sort of funny because like they're almost their own books, and I would
Right.
sort
I was
of
thinking that a few times. Like you could
right,
make a mini series, like a full mini series. Like
right,
each
right,
territory
right,
has its own beginning, middle, ongoing.
yeah,
Like it's so interesting the way it's all evolved and that depth of history. Each one has it their own version of it.
yeah,
Like they all go
yeah,
through the same pitfalls. They
yeah,
all go through the same hurdles. It's just they handled it this way. Someone else
and
handled
and
it
you
slightly different. It's super interesting.
and you see how interconnected they are, right?
Yes.
And if I
Yes.
wasn't a dummy, I also thought, oh, I'm going to do all the major areas, do different chapters, do a chapter for all these emerging, whiskey regions, and then also because why not? I'll do like essentially another book on the back of this book with 60 whiskey cocktail recipes, 30 classic cocktails, 30 modern classics from top bartenders, which again could be its own book, and
Yeah.
also Whiskey Timeline, which also could be its own book. Those two are appendixes at the end, or appendices at the end of the Whiskey Bible, which I mean, it's like a book that ate like other books, right? And um, for breakfast it ate other books. I guess was hungry. Um, but as I was working on it, I kind of fall in love with each country or area, right? So, I, and it's just, you go down so far the rabbit hole, whether it's America or Scotland or Ireland, Japan, Canada, and then like, at a certain point I had to move on, right? I had to finish the book, and it's like sort of that, you know, leaving that chapter and then working on the next chapter. Sometimes it's like very, sort of sad, like I'd
Saying
fall in
goodbye
love
to a
with,
friend.
yeah,
Yeah.
I'd fall in love with each one, like, and um, which was great. And then you also get these things where, you realize that like, whiskey sales in America, American whiskey sales, the high point is 1970. And then Scotch sales in America, the high point is 1975. And then it's about 30 years straight down. But what's fascinating is that the industry really bottoms out when Japan in the 80s, the Scotch market also crashes in Japan, but it takes like another decade. And Japan turns out to have bought a ton of Scotch, bulk Scotch whiskey. So that means like basically tankers full of Scotch, not bottled, right? Because partially because of the tariff system, it was cheaper to import, but also because Japanese, whiskey brands were blending Scotch into their blends, or, and so that was like a well-known aspect of Japanese whiskey. So once Japan was like, okay, look, people aren't buying whiskey here. The Scotch industry is like, okay, we've lost America, but now we've also lost Japan. And that's when really the whole idea of single malts is born, because at the time, single malts had one customer, and that was the blenders.
Right.
And the blenders had warehouses full of Scotch aging because their sales had declined. So the single malt people were like, okay, we've one client. The client doesn't want our product. What do we do? Some closed forever, some closed temporarily. And a lot of them reinvented themselves as a product for consumers that was bottled like for consumers. So it's like piecing that all together, and like nobody had ever said to me, oh yeah, like this is part of the reason why we did this, because it's America but it's also Japan. And then and I found the whole like you know like kind of like early stages of single malt Scotch is sort of adopted by French hipsters, even before it's introduced to America. Dave Weintraub had once suggested that. I thought he was lost his mind, but he was right. Like you look down all these old articles and French hipsters somehow discover it. Wasn't it? Nobody drinks single malt in Scotland, really. I mean, it's the most popular Scotch in Scotland's famous grouse, right? Which is a wonderful whiskey. It costs $20 a bottle. It's a blended Scotch. Um, Now people probably drink more single malt than they ever have in Scotland, but it was not like it was just us dummies when they were, the single malts then denigrated blends in order to sell, right? They were like, oh, rubes drink blends, like connoisseurs drink single malts, like people in Scotland only drink single malt. It was a total lie, right? But it worked. and we bought it hook, line, and sinker.
But that's the beauty of specifically whiskey history is how we have romanticized what was a marketing decision.
Yes.
Like the marketing worked so well
Yeah.
that until you started lifting the hood on the story
Right.
behind
Yes.
the romantic tale.
Yes.
I mean, it's brilliant not only to study from our industry's historical, but like put this in a marketing masterclass for how you have long-term growth and how the
Yeah.
proper messaging can affect 100 years of
Yeah.
of sales.
Don Draper is sitting in his conference room toasting Roger Sterling, with
Yeah,
martinis and old fashions, because it not only not only did it sell then, but you're right, it's the marketing taglines essentially became historical record.
that's
And I
right.
don't
That's
think any
right.
of us really realized that what we were parroting was really ad copy, right? That these people had created a lot of this nonsense to move cases, right? And it was not based on any historical precedents, evidence, right? It was just literally ad copy. And for a long time, I think maybe people knew that, but at a certain point, you know,
That was first tier. They knew
yeah,
it originally, and then
right,
as it kept going, the adopters of it after the
right,
initial, they just took it as truth.
right,
There was a
right,
gap from clipping to what your
right.
buddy told you was
Well,
good.
I mean, one of my favorite sections is like, I mean, there are many, so I say that about all of them, right? It's like you can't choose between your children,
Well,
but
before we
like,
get to that
oh
one, I
yeah,
did want to compliment you on the history of the cocktails that you put into,
oh
like eh, just going through at a glance the Waldorf, and you give a whole background on how it became the New York, the Manhattan cocktail, and how it just things that take it a step beyond ingredients. Like
yeah,
you like it, and now when somebody asks you to make them one, you've given
yes,
somebody proper things to say. Oh, what is this? Oh, it's a paper
that would.
plane. It's this and this and this and this.
Well, I mean, that was my goal. That like, if you were gonna, if somebody gave you a bottle of whiskey, and for each chapter, there's like what I call like a family tree with not tasting notes because obviously those need to be updated all the time. So
Right.
this is sort of more evergreen information, house style, history of the brand, founders. So basically, when somebody says to you, "What are we drinking?" Whether it's one of the whiskey cocktail recipes or one of the whiskeys, you have three or four things to say, right? You can
Love
say
that. I love that.
your spouse, your friend, your neighbor, your mother-in-law, father-in-law, whoever you're drinking with, sibling. Why did you buy this? Like, why did you spend so much money on this? Well, great question. Let me tell you, this is
This, and
why,
this.
right? And this is how, and and again, that's you. You would think that would be part of like the standard knowledge or the part of standard education. But even a lot of brands, because they've been bought and sold so many times, don't even understand why their own brand story or what makes them interesting or different than other brands, right? And it's like,
It's that
and they're
combination of
right.
PR and how you're what is it? Getting high on your own supply. Sometimes the employees will they're reading the same press release that the
Right.
uh consumers reading. So of
Or,
course it become hey, as you're going to talk to this group of people, these are some talking points
yeah.
that are our company talking points, but it's
Right.
important to understand the background of
Well,
those talking points as
yeah, I
well.
mean, that's the perfect segue. I mean, I was going to say before, like one of my a section I found really interesting working on was about Glenlivet. And I thought I knew everything about Glenlivet, right? I mean, total hubris, right? And that's the thing with writing about whiskey and researching whiskey is that every time you think that you've gotten to like rock bottom, you discover like a sub basement, right? There's always, you can go deeper. You can always, the shaft goes a lot deeper. This mine goes, until we come out the other side of the earth. This, you can go deeper, right? And, I was like, all right, like I've written about Glenlivet. I've been there, I've drunk, I love drinking Glenlivet. I knew so much about Glenlivet. And really, I realized that like not only was my own interpretation of the brand incorrect, but basically the way that we see Glenlivet is incorrect. And in fact, you know, this idea that it's, the Glenlivet gets essentially credit for a lot, but in reality, Glenlivet was an area, and it's almost like if somebody had trademarked the term Isla and said, "Okay, I'm going to have a brand. I'm going to call it the Isla whiskey." That's essentially what George Smith does for Glenlivet in 1824 after basically they get one of the first, they used to say the first, but it's actually one of the first legal distilling licenses. There's changes in regulation taxes, which makes it advantageous to actually open up a single malt distillery in the Highlands instead of just making whiskey, illegally. So he sets up his distillery legally. It's one of the first in the area,
It's
right?
also a huge caveat to any whiskey history.
Right, exactly.
Legally,
Right. But what's interesting is that the area was really well known for the whiskey that people were making there. It wasn't legal, but it was well known and respected. Essentially, by saying, I'm the Glenlivet, he suddenly gets that whole reputation for the area is now transferred to his brand. He then, once trademark law comes into, vogue or you can trademark a name, he and his son trademark the term the Glenlivet. There's then a lawsuit with the distillers in the area who are like, wait, what do you mean we can't call our whiskey Glenlivet anymore? And I'm talking about like Aberlour and Macallan and others. And he's like, no, I own the name the Glenlivet. Like, no, that's why it's the Glenlivet, right? As opposed to just Glenlivet, which was the general term. So there's a lawsuit. They settle. The compromise is that the other distillers can use both names, like Macallan and Glenlivet. Because I remember seeing old bottles in Scotland that would say Macallan Glenlivet. And I'm like, what is that, a blend? Why does it have both names? No, it's literally the result of a lawsuit. And ultimately, those other brands drop Glenlivet, as especially as Glenlivet becomes more and more famous. Was just really interesting. I mean, it's like, he's essentially taken the reputation for the area as his brand. And to be fair, the Glenlivet is very, very good, right? And like is one of the gold standards for Scotch making. But it's fascinating that it once wasn't really when we like a lot of the things that we ascribe to the brand, like, the king bought Glenlivet whiskey before it was like an even legal distillery. That was probably from the area, not from
right?
that distillery, right? Like a lot of the stuff that that again in press releases and people, writing about it, it's all been kind of conflated and mixed up. And like, it took a while to untangle, like, whoa, 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 whoa. Like, okay. And again, like through the lens of whiskey, things like lawsuits are incredibly fascinating because you have expert testimony, you have people testifying under oath, filing all types of, historical evidence, right? So really fascinating. I mean, for somebody who does what I do, whiskey history, thank God for lawsuits, or not against me, but for against brands and other people.
Well,
But it
because
provides it
yeah,
provides all this information.
in a very secretive
Yeah,
industry. So the
absolutely.
lawsuit is your almost recipe book to
Yeah.
putting some of those puzzle pieces together.
That federal commissions, the federal government, different different parts of the government doing research, whether it's the Department of Agriculture, other. I mean, I think as an industry, we often forget that like that's a lot of what the federal government is doing, right? Like research reports to help, different industries, business leaders, but a lot of that affects us, like, in terms of, growing grain or selling alcohol, or some of these reports are very detailed about, distilleries and all this stuff. And it's like, wow. And now, thanks to digitization, some of these things, may have once been lost in the depths of some library, at Harvard, somewhere in Cambridge, forgotten about. And who knows how it wound up there and somebody's papers that were donated or some archive somewhere. And now that it's all been digitized through some of these collective archives, it's incredible what turns up, and you're like, wow, there's so much work had been done. We're so close to losing it
Right, right.
all. But now it's accessible again.
That's,
Yeah.
I mean, just how long did it take? How many years have you been working on this?
Well,
Because
I
I know the
mean,
last book
yeah.
came out a while ago.
Yeah, I mean, the Workman approached me in 2020.
Oh,
So in
2020, you
earnest,
said that. That's right.
it took about like over 5 years. But I mean, in
That's wild.
reality, a lot of it also, it's stuff that I've been struggling to answer or figure out for 25 years in
That
reality,
that's
right? And
that's what I
it's
was getting
like,
at. Yeah.
yeah, and the Oxford Companion, which came out in the fall of 2021, you know, Dave and I were the editors, but like, we had over 100 contributors around the world writing articles. And again, I mean, that was all cocktails and spirits, right? So that was a very, very broad, um, broad project. Uh, but in reality, like, and Dave kept reminding me that this wasn't the Oxford Companion to whiskey, but to all cocktails and spirits. But I mean, again, that was very helpful and was in many ways like a master class. In what I would need to do for the whiskey Bible. And but again, I mean, some of these things, it's like working on a jigsaw puzzle, like a 3D jigsaw puzzle, right? Where pieces of the puzzle I'd find in different places or talking to different people, where something would come up about, you'd be looking for X and you'd find a document that talked about Y and be like, oh my God, I gotta go back into that chapter, like putting on a wet bathing suit, right? I
Right,
gotta like
right.
take off my dry clothes for the Scotch chapter, put on the wet American whiskey bathing suit again, right? Dive back into that dock and be like, oh my God, I can't, like, this is incredible. This explains why they couldn't do X but did Y instead. Like, and that was sometimes like, oh my God, like, and some of the stuff, like, I mean, it still happens. I did a talk the other day with Brian Nation, who'd been the master distiller at Middleton and now is in Minneapolis at Keeper's Heart. And they're coming out with their first pot still whiskeys. And, he made an offhand comment about, like, oh yeah, well, like, you can't, when you're using a pot still with corn or rye, you can't use a louder tone. You can't filter it because of those grains. The viscosity, it doesn't work. You can only use it with barley. And I was like, oh my, that like unlocked a whole epiphany about, like the history of the chamber still in America and us going from the pot still to the chamber still, ultimately three chamber still to the column still. I mean, that's a whole other episode of your show I won't get into. But that, like, because I'd always wondered, why didn't we just filter? Why did we need the chamber still? Well, we needed it because it's impossible to filter those other grains and you wind up burning them and the whiskey has a burnt flavor, right? So that's what put America on a completely different path than Scotland and Ireland, is because we wanted to use a different type of grain because it grew here. We wanted animal feed. In many ways, that was more important than the whiskey, was the animal feed. And animal feed, I mean, I'm a New York City kid. I know that I'd be talking about animal feed and feedlots, but like, I digress. But basically, it's better for the animal feed if the grain is cooked in the still, right? Animals apparently, they don't have the enzymes to digest very rich food, so it's better to, if the food it's less rich. Um, so it's better to cook it in the still, but as a result, it's harder to make whiskey. So again, I mean, just Brian's like, yeah, like I normally, I would just use a louder tone and I can't. Like, I can't filter it. So they did a modern workaround where, with an agitator, which obviously would not have been around in the 1800s.
Right.
But it's just fascinating how some things, where you're talking to one person and something comes up and you're like, oh my God, like that. And they don't even, what I mean? Like, he didn't know anything about the history of the chamber still, but I was just like,
But it opened up the
it's
door
like,
for you to go look that way.
right. I mean, it's just one of these, you realize over and over again how these things are interconnected and how knowledge shifts from one place to another, and just, how one thing begets another thing. And yeah, I mean, it's just, it felt some ways like I would never finish the whiskey Bible. Like, that it was just, and then left, what do people always say? Like, give a band all the money and studio time in the world and they'll never finish an album, but give them like enough time for like a week at studio, they'll give you an album, right? I
Right,
feel
right.
like left to my own devices, I mean, like I could still be researching the whiskey Bible. Like I don't know, I'm not sure, where it would have gone or what further places they would have gone, but it's just fascinating. At a certain point you're like, okay, like this has to be enough, right? Like the publisher went from being like, are you going to have enough? And I was like, yeah,
Yes,
like
yeah.
yeah, don't worry about this. They were like, okay, like, or how long are the? I'm like, don't worry. Like
Oh,
when it's
that's
all
too
said and
funny.
done, we're gonna be fine. Like they were like, okay, like it's a big book. I'm like, I'm fine. Like there's a lot here. We're covering a lot. Don't worry.
What a
And then by
publisher concern, though. Are you
right, and
sure
then
there's enough about whiskey to make a book about whiskey?
well, right. I mean, they were or of this length, right? Which is fair, right?
Yeah.
It had to be the series, they're big books, right? And I was like, do not worry. Like I'm not worried, don't worry. But by the end, it was funny because it was almost like, okay, you got to stop. Like we've got enough now. Like you got to turn off the spigot. Like this is great, but like we're approaching like maximum capacity here. Like you gotta like, yeah, like we gotta shut this down.
Were you
Um,
approaching your Howard Hughes in terms of living in that space too long? Like
um,
you'd been
my
building
Bruce
this ship.
Spruce,
Yeah, your
right,
spruce moose for
right,
so
right.
long that like you're going to eventually have something that wasn't going to take off.
I don't remember wearing Kleenex boxes or shoes at any point, but there definitely was like, towering piles of like printouts and books. And I mean, thank God, like a lot of stuff is now digitized, like whether it's books or magazine articles or so it's like, lots of files, right?
Right.
Like, again, if I'd done this book 10 years ago or 20 years ago,
Oh my
it
goodness.
would have been, those cardboard, like legal file boxes would have been, I would have been crushed by them, at one point, as they, towering over. But again, it sometimes it was the reverse where everything is so digital. I mean, I did obviously have lots of old books and magazines. I found somebody selling um, several years of journals from Association of Coopers in
Oh wow.
America. So it's like, yes, I will buy all of those. Like, it was, and it was funny because it had the mailing label. They were from like the 60s or 70s. And the mailing label was to like one of the distilleries. I don't know who, it must have been like their personal, the library, whatever brand must have thrown them out or given them to a library, which somehow found its way to some thrift store. And they were like, I was like, how many of these do you have? Like, I'll buy them all. Like, and like all those types of weird stuff. So I did have that, but then sometimes even just the digital files, you're like, okay, I know I have a story that mentions X.
Right.
What file would that be in? Like, it's like, be like, and I sometimes make multiple copies, if I had to reference it, or even some of the stories, it's like, the whole Irish versus Scotch story, which that, I mean, could again be a whole episode of your podcast, but
A
essentially
1000%. The
the
whole culmination of whiskey almost going under. So all of these feuds that have been feuds since the beginning of American whiskey put all of their muskets away and go hand in hand into the 80s and 90s.
right.
Like just wacky.
Right. But even like, if you want to start a bar fight at a whiskey festival, ask people who started making whiskey first, like Scotland or Ireland, right? And the Irish are like, the Scotch have their piece of evidence, which is, somebody's order, right? Where it's like a official order from the house, the purchasing, the person who handling stocking the larder is buying, barrels of whiskey. In Ireland, they're like, well, we've got something older. It's like, oh, what do you have? Well, the Red Book of Ossory, which sounds like something out of Game of Thrones, right?
Yeah.
You expect like, a dragon to be on the cover and like, and like, um,
House of Macallan says.
Right, exactly. We have the red book of get the red book of ossuary, right? But it turns out that it's called the red book of ossuary because it's covered in a red, like, leather, case or vellum, whatever it is. And everybody always cited it. I cited it, right? I'm like, and in your course of writing, you're like, love to quote what it actually says. Like the Scotch one you can find, right? You can find the quote, not a problem. What does the Red Book of Ossuary actually say? Well, it's in the holdings of the church in Kilkenny. Well, okay, I don't know anything about Kilkenny. So I finally tracked down the book, like old copies of it. It turns out to be in Latin, terrible Latin student, but it's hymns, prayers. I'm like, what does this have to do with whiskey distilling, right? So it turns out that perhaps at some point, like somebody, was using it kind of like as scrap paper. And there's a reference to basically making alcohol, but it uses the term, essentially like for grapes. To be fair, the term whiskey is a bastardization of the Gaelic Ishkabaha, which comes from the Latin aquavitae. And, for a long time, which just means water of life. So does vodka, it means water of life. Eau de vie means water of life. So the Latin was sometimes used very broadly, right?
Right.
There was not like this idea of gin is this, rum is that, tequila is this, mezcal. We got, just as vino de mezcal, right? That was that was how people referred to tequila and mezcal for years, right? If you look back in the 1800s, 1700s, 1600s, whatever it is, vino de mezcal, right? So it's kind of the same way. Okay, fine. We're using the Latin word for making wine, but now we have this like, this assumption there are no grapes in Ireland, so they must be using grain. Okay. Flimsy. It's
Leap.
not
It's a leap.
exactly it's not exactly the smoking gun any of us were hoping for, right?
And quoting for so long.
Right. But I still want to find like the notate, like this actual note.
Yeah.
So I've
Yeah.
got another book, can't find it. So I finally find in an academic journal from the late 1800s about religious studies talks about this in an archive. Incredible, right? And it talks about how Kilkenny turns out to be an English stronghold. So basically, when the English took over Ireland, Kilkenny was one of their strongholds. So if this was from the Church of Kilkenny, it was probably written by an English person, this note,
Right.
which really is not the conclusion that anybody
Right.
in this fight.
Was hoping for.
No, I mean, so you're like, so was this distilling knowledge from England? We don't know. I mean, it's possible. And Chaucer references somebody distilling beer. The first step in making whiskey is making unhopped beer. So is the distilling knowledge that we assume came down or across from Ireland and Scotland to England later really comes from England up and over? I don't know. We don't know enough, right? And there's not, but it's like one of those things like, oh God, I've gone too far. I've gone too far. Like,
But
what? Like,
but
wait,
that's
so
freaking awesome though, because you just opened
right,
up a whole new area for discussion that had
right,
previously just been
right,
assumed.
right. And just totally, just by saying, I mean, this was like 3 weeks of work, like solid work where like I just thought about this basically. Like, what, like, I just want to quote the Red Book of Ossuary. Like,
Just looking for one
I
highlight.
literally
Yeah.
thought I have the Scotch one. I have like, what does it actually say?
Yeah. Starting point. I'll put these two things
Right,
next to one another and let people and we'll have a
right.
discussion about it.
I really kind of freaked out when the book came, and I still have it, obviously, and it was all in Latin, and it was religious prayers and hymns. I was like, is there a hymn about making Scotch here? Like, I don't, is there a hymn about making whiskey? Like we came first, like, shut up, Scotland. Like, no, no, like, there's nothing in there. And I was like, All right, now I am thoroughly confused. Like, what is going on? Like, and again, there's not that many people one could call. I mean, I guess, I could have found a religious studies professor somewhere, maybe in Ireland, and either they would have known what I was talking about and been exactly like, yeah, here's the deal, but not understand the importance or the context, or they would have been like, what are you doing with your life? Like, why are you wasting it on this? Like, are you kidding me? Like,
They would
this
have
is what
treated you
you,
like a Star Wars fan, like a Star
right.
Trek fan.
They're,
You know,
they're like, you're not a historian, you dummy. Like,
oh, that's too
you waste your
funny.
time. Yeah, I don't know. Like, but it's just funny. I mean, but again, it's like all of these different crazy rabbit holes that when I started, I was like, of course, like Irish whiskey comes first because of the Red Book of Ossory. And that, turned out not to be exactly play out, not exactly how I thought it would. But thankfully, it's all in the whiskey Bible. I don't expect anybody to read it cover to cover. I guess you could. I have, but
Multiple times, I'm sure.
yeah.
Well,
But
the cool part
people
about how
tuck
you
in.
storytell, though, is that you take all of the confusion that might have gone into the note and you weave a story that
Yeah.
is enjoyable to the
Well, thank you.
whiskey loving public.
Well, that was the goal, and I thank you for saying that because as a writer, that's what you want.
Well, because you know the subject matter, you could have gone. This could have easily turned into stereo instruction, but it doesn't. You know what I mean?
Yes, yes,
With
yeah,
this much text, it could have very
yeah,
easily become a
yeah,
formulaic A B
yeah,
C,
yeah.
and you didn't do that. You're
That would
able
have
to
been
create.
easier. It would have taken me less time. I mean, don't think I didn't think about that. But yes, I was trying to make it lively and interesting and conversational. And to be honest, like kind of like coming to a cocktail party, right?
That's right.
Like
That's
hopefully
right.
you pour yourself a whiskey or make yourself a cocktail, open up the book, join the party for a little bit, meet some of these wildly colorful characters from whiskey history, stay a few minutes, enjoy your drink, close the book, go back to your regular life.
Well, and I think it's important to say how fair-handed you are with the text, with the information that you're sharing. You give everybody that you chronicle the same level of respect and courtesy. I know you don't absolutely love every brand in existence, but you've represented them in a way that they all come across
Thank you.
as
Ah,
just as
look,
important as other ones in noted right next to them.
yeah.
It's very well done, Noah.
Well, thank you. Thank you. I mean, I tried, it's not my job to like shame people
That's right. That's right.
or tell people, look, I truly, if you walk away with anything from this book, is that you should drink whiskey any way that makes you happy, right? That brings you
100%.
enjoyment. It's not my job to shame you or tell you that you can or cannot add X or Y. That kills me. It's your drink. You should drink it the way that you want to drink it, right? And also like, it's very subjective. I hope that like if you tell me that you like X, that you come away from reading the book that you might discover other things that you might also enjoy. But, it's like, nobody reads a cookbook to be yelled at, right?
A
You
thousand
know,
percent.
it's not like you like that kind of pasta sauce, you moron. Like you're not worthy of my other, like, no, that's not how it works. Like, I don't, only in our world do people, I think,
Put
uh,
such a pronounced lens on
yes.
the
Well, but that's
judgy
also
part of it.
market, but that's also, to be honest, that comes from a lot of marketing. You know what I mean?
Well, that's what I
That's
was going to
another
ask you.
facet of
Yeah,
marketing is this sort of judgment. And again, I mean, I think it's also dangerous because I can make fun of a brand and you can tell me, well, that's the brand I used to drink with my mom and dad every night. And, that's our family's favorite. I can't come back from that ever. You know what I mean? You will throw this book in the garbage and I will help you. You know what I mean? Like,
I was
that's
going to
not
say
like,
that would also
that's
hurt me
like,
personally if I
right. To
was
me
to
too.
do that to somebody's
I would
mythos.
feel horrible. Right. And
Yes, a
again,
thousand percent.
I don't,
That's not the goal.
no, I'm just happy that people are drinking whiskey, right?
That's
I
right, a
don't,
hundred percent.
like, and to help them understand what they're drinking, right? And maybe that will, maybe they'll think about using it in a cocktail or adding this or that, or not realize that the same person who makes their favorite whiskey also makes another whiskey, right?
Yeah,
Like,
yeah.
like,
Open up that breath.
right, or just understand, give them the context so that when they order it, they feel more confident as a drinker. So
Make an
when
informed
somebody
decision.
says, why, bartender, I think it's so scary to a lot of people when a bartender says, how do you make that again? What is that? What do you want? Like, and just to say, yeah, like, this is like, especially, some of the brands, they have the names can be unusual, right?
Yeah, yeah.
I try to put in pronunciations, but the point is that like even understanding that like, something that Lefroy comes from Isla, right? And even if you said, look, do you have Lefroy? And they had no idea what you're talking about, or they think that it needs to be pronounced Lefrogue or Islay instead of Isla, whatever. Like, who cares? But at least you would know enough to say, like, look, I really like smoky peaty Scotch.
Yeah,
Like, you
that's
got
right.
something
That's
like
right.
that,
That's
right?
the bottom of
And
the
just
yeah.
and just make people feel better. And also maybe, if you like Lefroy and somebody says, "Oh, have you tried Bowmore or Ardbeg or have you tried Talisker from Skye?" Like, just again, the worst thing that happens is you don't like it, right? And you go back to what you like, but maybe that leads to a whole other world of whiskeys. And some of these, it's funny because I also try to put like family trees where you see
I like the
like
family
the
trees quite a
same,
bit.
yeah, because sometimes people don't understand. If I had $1 for every time somebody told me about Woodford Reserve,
Right,
right? Like this
right.
new craft, I'm like, it's a great whiskey. It's Brown Forman. Like, what? Like, same people who make Jack Daniels make this is their other brand, another distillery. Like, oh. And it's like same thing with like, Jim Beam. Like, people will be like, "Oh, I'd never drink Jim Beam." Like, oh, why?
I
Like,
guarantee.
but I love Knob Creek or I love Booker's. I'm like, the same people make Jim Beam White Label and Booker's. Booker is named for Booker No, who was Jim Beam's master distiller. He was Jim Beam's grandson. Like, mind blown. You know what I mean? It's like one of these things you're like,
But
I
that's the
would,
beauty of being
right?
in the
Like,
information business. You know
right?
what I
Like,
mean?
right, but in a good way where their minds are
Oh,
like,
yes.
or it's like, I never really thought about that brand, but I should try it again. I'm like, yeah, you should. Like,
That's the thing, man.
where you don't have to spend, you have to break the bank to find a wonderful whiskey. You don't have to buy the oldest whiskey to find one that you're going to really enjoy. Price and age, no guarantee that you'll enjoy it more than a younger whiskey or a less expensive whiskey. I mean, there are very practical matters why you pay more or why, older has different flavor profile. I might love the older one. You might like the younger expression. And for a different brand, you might like the older one and I might like the younger one. It's
It
no
could differ
guarantee. Right.
between today and tomorrow.
Right.
Like I
It's not like we're gonna like 18's my number no matter
right,
who makes it, right?
right.
Or 12-year-old, that's my jam, but I don't like 14 and I don't like 8. It really is dependent on the brand, the warehouses, where in the world it is, the type of barrels they use, like the climate, like there's so many different variables, which again, any normal person has a myriad of things that are more important than thinking about this. But like, this is like what you and I think about, but like to kind of remind folks that like, look, this plays out this way.
Yeah, yeah. It's
So,
expansive. Which
right,
that I got a question for you. In your learnings from this, have consumers? I feel like we're at a space right now where everybody's reopening up what they think is plausible in terms of what makes good whiskey. The consume. Well, for example, you were just talking about white label. A consumer back in say 1982, I only drink Jim Beam
right.
White Label. I only drink Coca-Cola. I only drink Budweiser. I smoke Marlboro Reds, and I drink White Label. And that's their four
Right.
consumer. they love it. And now everybody is, well, I love a good toasted, and sometimes I'm in the mood
Yeah.
for a high rye, and sometimes, if it's Thursday, I'm probably drinking wheated. Like we're not as brand loyal as we used to be.
Yeah.
We know more, so we're experimenting with more. Has there been ebb and flows throughout your research where you see the consumer be a little more prickly at times, or be as open as we could be considered now at times, or has it always been a steady, like is it back and
Yeah.
forth, or
No, I hear
or
what you're saying. It's a great question. I mean, and speaks to a lot of like, consumer behavior and also supply. I mean, look, we're living in a golden age of whiskey, right?
right?
I mean, I would argue that the selection on store shelves and bars has never been this large. We're getting products not just from across the US, right? I mean, there are, I think, 2,000 distilleries in the US. Many of them make or bottle whiskey. We now have, I think at last report, 50 distilleries in Ireland. I mean, there were two not that long ago, right?
Yeah,
Many of them making whiskey or will be making whiskey. We have places like India, Taiwan, Israel, Lebanon, um, Australia, New Zealand, all making whiskey and very good whiskey, right? Like incredibly good whiskey that and what I love about it is that a lot of these places have started to make whiskey and put their own, it's evolved to include their own local customs, traditions, ingredients. Amazing, right?
yes,
So
a
it
hundred percent.
tastes, it's like a whole new wonderful like, area for whiskey in terms of flavor profile, all new methods that have also other than, like the sort of cross pollination where like somebody tries one thing in one part of the world, somebody else sees that, tries it there, they have a different result, but it creates different types of flavors. So this is incredible, like sharing of knowledge, right? So there are more whiskeys than ever on store shelves. I'm happy that people do not just drink one, right? Because there's so many different varieties. To your question, though, I think that throughout whiskey history. It's a wild roller coaster ride, the history. And I found myself writing that basically at the beginning of each chapter. And then I was like, I can only do this once, right? But it is, right? Like each one goes on this crazy highs and lows. Very rarely over the last you know, 150 years when whiskey, at least in America and Scotland too, comes in a bottle in Canada, right? Directly from the distillery. 1870 is Old Forester comes out. It's a bottled whiskey. Up until that point, if you wanted whiskey, you'd go to a bar tavern, which doubled as a store, or a grocery store, which would double as a bar, and they would buy barrels. They'd blend them often, like they would have their own proprietary tea blend or spice blend. They would have like their own whiskey blend. You would bring a decanter or a flask or buy a glass, right? Or buy a jug of it, a ceramic jug. But like 1870 is really the first bottled whiskey in North America, or at least in the US. Owens patents his bottle machine right after the turn of the century, which mass produces bottles and allows distilleries to fill bottles. So really, in that, it's like 125 years, not even really. Um, and if you take out Prohibition and World War II and World War One and Depression, we've never really had that kind of luxury, right? To for this kind of selection, like you did in the 50s and 60s. I think we start to see people open up a little bit, or at least they might switch from American whiskey to Scotch, all the GIs coming back in the 50s and 60s. You have all these people who've tried Chivas Regal and Johnny Walker, and they want smooth Scotch. American whiskey has to shut down, obviously, for World War II. It takes a while for straight whiskey to be available again in the 50s. So it's sort of hard to say. I mean, I think there are way more options now. People are more into trying different things. And I can't really think of another period except like out of desperation during like something like Prohibition when you were like, whatever. Like you got a
Yeah,
bottle
yeah.
of real whiskey, I don't care. Like let's drink it.
Give me the bathtub variety.
Right. Hopefully we won't die.
Where'd you
Which is
go? I've gone
right,
blind.
right. It's I mean that's also one of the common myths was that we've all watched too many versions of The Great Gatsby where it looks like super fun time where everybody is dressed to the nines, drinking delicious champagne and
Doing the
aged
Charleston.
whiskey. Yeah, and we're all beautiful and we're all stylish and drunk, and nobody is blind. From drinking grain alcohol or dying from poisonous alcohol.
Right, right,
But I mean, really, it was like one of you had very wealthy people. Who'd bought liquor stores literally worth of booze before Prohibition starts because it was legal to drink what you had. You just couldn't buy more.
right.
But then if at the other end of the spectrum, you're buying booze in a back alley from a gangster who it could be stuff from Canada, but it's probably cut with God knows what. Or it could be another type of alcohol that really would not potable and kill you. And you never really kind of knew. Um, so that's also one of these funny things where everybody thinks it was such a wonderful time, and almost no cocktails were invented during Prohibition. All these fanciful ideas about to disguise the bad flavor, we're gonna create the X cocktail and wine. It's like Gary Reed always talked about this, the late great writer. When you're worried that the feds are about to kick down your door, are you really going to be like, taking the time to swirl and mix macerate fruit and no, you're gonna take a shot and get the hell out of the alley,
Right, right.
like you're not nobody's sticking around for bitters and adding a twist of orange peel. No, you're gone. Like um
Open the
yeah,
bowling ball, put 2 ounces of your favorite
right,
elixir into a shoe, and then throw in a couple cherries, muddle some oranges. No,
right,
no. Into
no,
my face you go.
right, exactly. I mean, so yeah, I mean, I can't, I feel like I've told you everything and nothing, but I don't think I feel like this we're living in an age where people are way more open to all types of whiskey, and that's kind of revolutionary. Where before now, that's like not something that really happened when besides Prohibition, like or during World War II when it was really hard to get whiskey. You could get rum, but not whiskey because the distilleries were shut down. They were converted to make incredibly high proof alcohol that was then converted into a range of war goods like
Right,
gunpowder and rubber. You needed high proof alcohol to make vulcanized rubber, which we needed obviously for the war effort. So the distilleries in the Caribbean don't shut down, so they're making a ton of rum. Coca-Cola promises the armed services, the GIs, that they would never raise the price above a nickel a bottle, which is where we really get the popularity of the rum and Coke, right? Because there's plenty of rum and Coca-Cola, no matter where the army went, there was always Coke and it was nickel. They were even building plants, which that's I think part of the reason why Coke has such an incredible distribution network and factories around the world is partially because of the war. I mean, the war shapes World War. Again, this could be a whole other episode. World War II shapes the alcohol industry and the way that we drink in
huge.
hugely in ways
Yeah.
that like very few people ever discuss. And then, for us, like there's a whole fascinating part of the whiskey Bible, or at least I think it's fascinating, about Louis Rosenstiel, who started the company Shenley. Sidney Frank, who started Grey Goose, was Louis Rosenstiel's son-in-law, and worked at Shenley for years. But,
See, that's where I
Rosenstiel,
geek out. Those
oh,
connections
yeah,
are what
it's
makes it so
crazy.
much fun.
It's totally crazy. But Louis Rosenstiel, I mean, during Prohibition, Winston Churchill tells him that repeal is going to come. So he starts buying up distilleries and the intellectual property of distilleries for pennies on the dollar. Churchill was correct. And, Rosenstiel is like, in business. He knows during World War II, Shenley has to they convert all their stills, right? Um, so after the war, everything seemingly is going well. And then the Korean War is like on the horizon. And Shenley, Rosenstiel thinks to himself, okay, I know what's going to happen. I've lived through this once. they're going to shut us all down to make high proof alcohol. I'm going to fill all of our warehouses full of whiskey now. We're going to run these distilleries. He needs a ton of distilleries now. And he's like, we're going to run them night and day. We're going to fill up every barrel cup with whiskey, everything. We're going to fill these warehouses until they burst, right? Because I'm going to make so much money here. So, of course, he's right. The Korean War happens, but it's not even a war. It's a conflict. It only lasts for a few years. The distilleries never have to shut down because now somebody's figured out how to make rubber without high proof alcohol. And, we don't need it, I guess, for making explosives. So they're allowed to stay open. So then Louis Rosensteel's like, oh God, because at the time you had to pay taxes. The government had set an age. So if whiskey hit that age, you had to pay taxes, whether or not it was still in your warehouse, right? Like, you know what I mean?
Wow.
So he would have been hit with this giant tax bill. So he's aggressively lobbying Congress to change this tax law when they consider whiskey to be mature. So basically pushing back his tax bill.
Right.
Retroactively, it would be retroactive, right? Um, the only people who were against this were Seagrams and then some of the temperance folks who were like, this is only going to benefit Shenley. Seagrams is like, this is ridiculous. Like, why are you guys doing this? Um, but he's not sure if that's going to happen. So he's also like, Louis Rosensteel's the one who's then started to push for calling bourbon America's native spirit, like starts all of like, saying only in America we can make bourbon, right? This is all comes from him. He also starts like marketing this idea of older whiskey, right? That we should drink. Seagram's is already doing this Chivas Regal, right? Which is like really one of the most successful campaigns around age for whiskey, right? And becomes like kind of the gold standard for decades. Nikita Khrushchev supposedly comes here and wants to try Chivas Regal, right? And he does. But Rosensteel is pushing this idea of ever older American whiskey, also pushing this idea that we should export more whiskey. He's like, look, the only people who buy our whiskey outside the country are on army bases, which again, like even today, where with the tariff discussions, relatively little American whiskey is actually exported outside of Canada, right?
Right.
Um, and I mean, obviously, I think we should be exporting a lot more to drinkers around the world.
Yeah.
Um, but so, Rosensteel is able to get Congress to pass this bill. They shove it into a giant in the middle of some giant other bill. Nobody even probably sees it in there. He gets to postpone his tax bill, right? Save millions of dollars. But because of all of the other stuff that he did, like, he pushes out this idea of older whiskey, right? That wasn't a thing, right? But out of necessity, because he had so much whiskey aging, it becomes a thing, right? And
Yeah.
and we still see that now where, they're now 18, 20, 21-year old American whiskeys, which, you know, that wasn't really a thing. Like even when I started writing about booze, I'd ask the legendary, American distillers, like, what's the ideal age? And they'd say 6 to 8 years.
Right. Right.
That was it. Like, they didn't, beyond that, they were like, ugh, like, no, thank you. Because then you could taste the whiskey, the actual alcohol, like the flavor that they put in, also the wood. But it's just interesting how, even even in my career, how ideas
Have shifted
selection
and
ever
grown.
absolutely. But
Uh, do you ever feel bad for some of the craft guys who have worked their ass off to get 8 to 10 year whiskey, and now everybody's like, "Where's the 17 year whiskey? Like, where's that 20? Like you know what I mean?" It's like,
right, like the
no,
the yard marker
yeah,
keeps
yeah,
changing.
they
Well,
keep
I
moving
mean,
it
look,
back.
I
It's it's
think,
it's
yeah,
good. It's really good whiskey. I wish people would stop being
I
age
don't,
queens
yeah,
about the
I
whole
don't,
thing.
I don't like,
I don't know
I
if that's
would,
how you say that or not.
I don't know, like I've never heard that, but it's look, I think getting to 6 or 8 years like that, I still would say that that's if you're looking for whiskey, that's the standard, right?
Right,
That
right,
really is. And again, these folks would tell me that, and then, learning more about barrels for the whiskey Bible, talking to the wood scientists, which I don't even know if that was a career years ago, at least in our industry, but
right,
talking to the wood scientists, a lot of the flavor comes from the barrel, up to 80% of whiskey, right? Depending upon who you ask, and a lot of the color, all the color, for American whiskey, right? All whiskey comes off the still clear. In other countries or some other countries, they're allowed to add spear caramel, which sort of,
right.
but the majority of the color comes from the wood, right? Um, but some of the flavor compounds in the wood, alcohol is a solvent, so it's breaking down the wood. Some of the flavor compounds are water soluble, some are alcohol soluble, which is why I would argue for a lower barrel entry proof, but that's a whole other thing. Um, those it takes several years for the barrel to really to infuse into the alcohol
That's right. That's right.
these flavor compounds, which then mature and evolve over time. So, like, a lot of these distillers who don't have PhDs in chemistry, thermodynamics, like our old like great Dave Pickerel, but others, folks who just did it by flavor and sense, knew that 6 to 8 was ideal, where in reality they were right, because it takes like at least 4 to 5 years for the barrel, for those flavor compounds to leach into the alcohol,
To really be
right?
primed. Yeah.
Yeah, otherwise you're not getting them. The alcohol leaves before you're getting the flavor compounds, which part of the reason why some of like the 1, 2, 3-year-old whiskey isn't that depth of flavor and complexity doesn't exist, because they're not getting it. They're
It's
just
literally
leaving.
not to the
They're
starting line yet.
literally
Yeah.
leaving too soon.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
so again, I mean, I say right, it's like I would say that most distilleries are probably should not be aging their whiskey in America to 17 years, right? That's an aberration. Like, I was down at Buffalo Trace this summer picking a single barrel with somebody, blazing hot. It was like the end of July, beginning of August, like
Whew.
100 degrees. It was sticky, right?
Yeah.
Incredible. Wonderful for whiskey aging, not so great for walking around and sipping high proof alcohol.
100%.
Um, but we cooled off in their warehouse. That is essentially a giant refrigerator, right? Is
Right.
like, for years we've known that, like, steam heating allows warehouses to maintain a consistent temperature. Otherwise, it gets too cold. The whiskey doesn't age. But here it's by putting the barrels in to essentially a giant refrigerator, we can slow down the aging process. I'm ready to move in. I'm like, great, give me a room in this warehouse. I also want to age more slowly. But that will allow them possibly to age like things like Pappy or Weller or Stag for like
Sure.
30, 40, 50 years, essentially mimicking what happens in Scotland. If you go to Scotland this summer, it's like 60 degrees. That's why they don't
Yeah.
add ice. It has nothing to do with whether you should or you shouldn't. It's 60 degrees. Nobody needs to be adding ice to their scotch, because why would you, right? You'd be
Yeah.
shivering. Um, you know,
But a Kentucky summer,
I was gonna say,
a
go
cube's
to right.
fine.
You're gonna want as much crushed ice as you could get. You understand the mint julep suddenly, right? Cooling of the mint, the ice, bring it on, right?
Beautiful.
Um, which also was the ultimate flex. Forget a Rolex Daytona. Back in the 1800s, if you ordered like a mint julep, there were no refrigerators, so that ice had to come from some lake up in Maine, and you're in Kentucky. It cost a king's ransom. Everybody knew you were wealthy, right?
Oh, I love that.
That it was the ultimate flex. You're going to drink your drink, done with the ice. Like,
Yeah.
I don't even want it. Like, I'm good. The whole drink, you have to put more ice on top as a garnish. Like, why? It's just a flex. It's
It's
just
just
a
a show
total,
off.
it's the most show off drink. Now we don't appreciate it because everybody has access to cheap ice, right? It's free ice. But then that was literally, it'd be like taking off your Rolex Daytona and just like be like, I wore it today. Goodbye. Like smashing with a mallet.
Ah,
I'll need to wear it tomorrow. I'll get another one.
I'll get another one.
Um,
I've got 9 of them. I got
right.
one
But
for every day of the week and
right.
two
It's
for each weekend.
exactly. But yeah, I mean, it's but now, like I would say with most whiskey, I'm bringing it around. Um, Most craft distillers, I think it's a great achievement. Like to have been in business long enough to have
Yes,
fully mature whiskey in a full size barrel that's 5, 6, 7, 8 years. Like that's incredible. And I do
ever.
not think that anybody needs, most people should not be aging their whiskey to 17, right? Especially in certain climates where it's very, I mean, they should almost think more like folks in Mexico or the Caribbean, right? Rum, tequila distillers, mezcal producers, where obviously the rate of maturation is so much influenced by climate, right? And creating that pressure in the barrel, right, as the alcohol and the air heats up, pushes the alcohol, expands, pushes the alcohol into the wood, then it cools down, there's less pressure, it pulls back out with all of the wonderful flavor compounds, right? So again, I mean, we don't want it all just pushed into the wood for the whole time. And that's, as somebody from Independence Dave, their chemist, was explaining to me, it's sort of you want you want the alcohol to go in and out of the barrel, not too quickly, but also not too slowly, right? So you don't want it all in the wood and then it's all tannin. You want it to age in the barrel for a good amount of time and then be pushed into the wood for a good amount of time and then be pushed back into the barrel. So it's like you want, that this sort of long
It's a balancing
swings,
act.
right?
Yeah. It's like
Absolutely.
any good chef putting together
Yes,
anything. You want it all to
exactly.
be where it should
Right.
be. And
Exactly.
and thank you for that because I think the craft distillers, like, guys, don't be getting on your age high
Yeah.
horse. Go give
No.
these guys, if they've put out something that is their 10-year masterpiece, don't go have it.
Look,
It's beautiful that they've done that.
age is just a number for whiskey, right?
That's right.
After,
That's right.
especially, I mean, as once you hit 4, 5, 6 years, like you're in the sweet spot, right?
That's right.
And I think it's fascinating sometimes to taste whiskeys, whether it's 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, whatever it is, to see the difference of another year, 6 months. Also, the same thing with proof, like going down proof point by proof point, right? Not just bottling at the minimum 80, right? Or the maximum cask strength, right? It's like there is a true art form in proofing these things down, which again, I wasn't sure how much of an influence was until I did it, with Old Forester and Campbell Brown. And each proof point really makes a giant difference.
And when you
But
find when they do it effectively, like was
oh
drinking some beautiful rye out of Virginia, and just the proof point matches where the whiskey when they hit the right way and they come
yeah,
together the
yeah,
right balancing act,
oh,
it's just so perfect. Oh my God,
unbelievable.
Noah, I feel like I want to do this again. I want to talk about World War II. I want to talk about the 70s and 80s. I want to talk about Japan. I want to go deeper into the Irish coffee. I have thoroughly enjoyed this time with you today. The
Oh,
book is The Whiskey Bible. You can get it anywhere. You can. Did they let you do an Audible? Did you get to?
not yet,
Not
not
yet.
yet. But so you can find the Whiskey Bible online retailers, independent
Everywhere.
booksellers. Yeah. So, but thank you so much for having me on.
Oh, anytime, man. I know we got to talk a little bit at dot 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 in Charlotte, I think last fall or last November or so, which is
Yeah,
why I'm very glad we were able to get together and do this. Please come back and see me again. And
absolutely.
if you end up doing a audible version of this, A, you've got the voice for it. But B,
And the face. Yeah.
but I love hearing stories of when authors have to audition for their own books. So please, with your personality, I'm sure that just be the whole conversation would be amazing to hear.
Very fun.
So, everybody, you want a clear guide to all things whiskey, the Whiskey Bible. Noah, it's been an absolute pleasure talking to you today, buddy.
Thank you
Come
so
back
much
and
for
see
having
me
me.
again.
Absolutely.
Cheers.
Cheers.